finally here. The agonisingly long wait for the Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution dub is over. To celebrate Pokémon Day, the anniversary of the franchise, the Pokémon company has teamed up with Netflix to debut a Pokémon film on a streaming service for the first time ever. Over the past couple of weeks, I was on a mission to rank all 22 previously released Pokémon films from worst to best. But now the 23rd film has been released and we need to add it to the list. For the first time ever, we have a remake of one of the franchise's films. And not just any film, by far the most beloved film in the franchise. I'll be reviewing the film and then ranking it amongst the other 2 decades worth of movies. A lot of people had already made their minds up on this one before even seeing it, but let's dive into Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution and see it for ourselves. This film was never going to please everyone, and I'd argue it was a silly idea from the start. It was purely made to tie into being 20 years after the original film's release in English, but they didn't even release it in 2019, so what was the point? To sum up my feelings on Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, this is basically just an inferior version of the original film that came out over 20 years ago. While it does change a few things here and there, for the most part this is almost a shot-for-shot remake in 3D. The real kicker is, the things that are changed here actively make the film worse in my opinion. So essentially, you're left with this film feeling kind of pointless. The film kicks off in sort of the same way, but we quickly start to see some of the changes they've made. We still see Dr. Fuji and his team looking for the Mew fossil, but it's laid out a little differently and a bit more in depth. I wouldn't say this change is better, but at worst I'm neutral on it. After that, things start to get different in a much more noticeable way. Mewtwo's opening monologue where he's questioning his existence is pretty different here. While the same general theme of the speech is kept, the lines have been completely changed, and for the most part, they're much worse. Much of Mewtwo's speech came off extremely cringeworthy here. At times it felt like there was no flow to what he was saying, and it honestly seemed like they were just changing lines for the sake of it. Mewtwo quite literally says the film's title before the film then cuts to the title screen. However, I sort of appreciated what they were going for here. They really play up the existential crisis Mewtwo is going through, even more so than the original. Mewtwo straight up asks the scientist what the hell is going on with its birth. It asks if it has a mother or father, and just what exactly it is. They really get across that Mewtwo sort of feels like he's human, but doesn't actually feel like a human due to constantly being treated lesser by the humans around him. He also doesn't feel like a Pokémon. He's trapped in the middle and can't understand what he's supposed to be. I really liked the message they were going for here, but the delivery of it needed some work. For some reason, the armor Giovanni gives to Mewtwo undergoes a makeover here. While it doesn't affect literally anything in the film, it feels like a microcosm of the larger issues at play. Why did they need to change this? The original armor was fine, and this change adds nothing. What we get is so unnecessarily over-designed. Fast forward to when Ash and the gang are heading out to New Island and we get more changes. One of the most iconic moments of the first film, particularly in the West, is when Team Rocket shows up as Vikings attempting to deliver the twerps to the island. Some people cringe and some people love the Vikings live in Minnesota line, but in general, this didn't need to change. But what do you know? Team Rocket shows up in a completely different getup here. Now, that alone isn't exactly bad. They're in a Lapras boat and dressed as sailors, not exactly egregious. What is egregious is the god-awful musical number they have here. Why? Why did they need to have a musical number? This is what I mean. Almost every time they change something, they make it worse. I'm not remotely against them making new additions, but they have to be better, especially when it comes to something as beloved as this film. From this point onwards, Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution basically plays out exactly the same as the original film. Obviously specific shots and lines are different, but the plot and how it's delivered are basically a one-to-one conversion. Now you're starting to understand what I meant earlier? Unfortunately, probably the biggest change does come late in the film. Remember Meowth's iconic speech about not hating other people due to the origin of their birth? Well, that's gone here. Instead, the moment is completely lackluster and nothing of note happens during the conversation. What a bummer. They do keep Mewtwo's line about one's origin of birth though, thankfully. Just regurgitating Mewtwo Strikes Back in 3D form seems kind of pointless. Over half the film is exactly the same, while the early bits that did change aren't very good. To be honest, the early bits that they do alter aren't even that major. They're jarring as someone who has seen the original a million times, but they don't fundamentally change the film. I'll give credit where credit is due here. There are some changes I did like. Firstly, while they obviously were never going to be able to use the original opening song here, they tried to remain as faithful as possible. Basically, they remixed the XY version of Pokémon theme, but in almost exactly the same style as they did in the first film. It's extremely tasteful and plays brilliantly. Hats off to them. The other change most people are going to enjoy is the slight tweaking of the film's message towards the end. In the dub, they kinda got a little clumsy with this delivery in the original, and it can come across as them condemning all Pokémon fighting, which is a little hypocritical considering what this franchise is about. I've gone over how I don't think the dub's message is too different to the Japanese, but here they really stay away from outright saying fighting is wrong. Instead, they talk more about how these Pokemon shouldn't be fighting against each other just because they're different than one another. It's far less fighting is wrong and much more don't be a racist. Oh, and there's a post-credits scene that basically shows Mewtwo arriving at where he's shown to be living in Mewtwo Returns. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't see that in the original. I thought it was a nice little nod at the end. Circling back to the music, it was always going to be tough to put together an adequate score here. The original Mewtwo Strikes Back, in both Japanese and English, has undoubtedly some of the most iconic tracks in Pokemon history. Not only does this score not come close to replicating the epic feeling half as well, but in general the score just feels meh. I'm sure the original songs are caught up in an absolute spider's web of legal red tape and copyright, but damn, I would have enjoyed this so much more if the score was replaced with the original. And now we've come to the gigantic elephant in the room, the animation. Guess what? I like the animation style, sue me. Everybody's tastes are different, but I think some of the hate on the animation is disingenuous. To me, it feels like a lot of misdirected anger being placed on the most obvious change made for this film. I think a lot of people are mad about something from their childhood being remade, so they reach for the most visible change so they have something to shit on without having seen the film. Remember, just because something is different, it doesn't mean you have to fight it. I also find it kind of funny that Dragon Quest Your Story, which was also released on Netflix in the West recently, hasn't caught as much flack. It uses basically the exact same style and seems to be catching no criticism. Heck, the 3D loop in the third film is pretty similar in style too, and people were going gaga over that. Honestly, I think some of the shots are gorgeous here. I just love the way colours pop, it's such a vibrant film. The use of colouring in the original Mewtwo Strikes Back is one of my favourite things about that film, so it's cool to see the remake doing something similar, albeit vastly different. The animation is also extremely fluid here. I'll probably catch hate for this, but so be it. I liked it. What are my thoughts on Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution as a whole though? Overall, I think this is a lesser version of the original, unfortunately. It loses a fair bit of the charm of the original, and the overwhelming majority of the things they change here have a negative impact. Because of that, it was never going to be possible to rank it higher than the original. At the end of the day, I could never imagine myself sitting down and choosing to watch this remake instead. However, I'd be lying if I said the film was all bad. It has many positive areas, and for the most part, this is a strict retelling of the original story. If you liked Mewtwo Strikes Back, there's absolutely no reason why you should hate this remake. In the end, I rank Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution at 14. It drops below the original film and Celebi Voice of the Forest, but because it's essentially still just Mewtwo Strikes Back, it manages to sit ahead of 9 other films. That's my thoughts on Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. But what did you guys think? Have you seen the film yet? If you have, give me a review of the film and where you think it ranks down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I've got plenty more Pokemon content on the way.